Hey everyone, it's Mr. Hollywood, and today I will be giving the top 10 MLB League Championship Series of all time. Now before I give you my ranking, feel free to share your ranking down below in the comments, and don't forget to vote for the pitcher fan voting down below in the description. Now, let's get started. Coming in at number 10 is the 1992 NLCS between the Pirates and the Braves. This NLCS was just very entertaining. It was a very close battle between the Braves and the Pirates. The Braves, fresh off making the World Series the year before, were coming out firing again. And the Pirates, who had Barry Bonds, who was like the best player in MLB at that time, were trying to make it back to the World Series. But in the end, the Braves ended up winning in a really competitive Game 7. And that is why it is number 10. Now coming in at number 9 is the only championship series on the list that did not go all 7 games, and that is the 1986 NLCS between the Mets and the Astros. However, the games were still extremely intense that I still had to put it on the list. And it was one of the few times where the MVP of the League Championship Series was on the losing team. Mike Scott put up one of the best postseason performances by a pitcher, and he completely wiped the floor when he faced the Mets. And Game 6 was really intense, where the Mets were up 3-2. However, Mike Scott, the NLCS MVP, was going to pitch the next day, so it was pretty much like they had to win on Game 6. And they were losing for most of the game, but then they tied it in the 9th. And then they eventually won it in the 16th inning. And the whole series was just very intense. A lot of the games were just very fun to watch. And overall, it was just one of the all-time greats. So that is why it's at number 9. Number 8 is a 2025 ALCS. I was debating where to put it, considering it's obviously a relatively recent series. So I think putting it towards the back end of the top 10, I think that's very reasonable at this very moment in time. But yeah, that series was just intense. The Mariners won the first 2 on the Blue Jays turf, but then the Blue Jays took 2 of the 3 from the Mariners on the Mariners turf. However, it was still guaranteed the Mariners would make it farther than ever, because prior to this, the farthest they ever made it was Game 6 of the NLCS. And then the Blue Jays ended up winning Game 6. However, the Game 7 was just, an amazing game. And that is why I had really tough feelings of where to put it, but I did settle on number 8. But yeah, that whole game was so intense. Mariners were winning for most of it, 8 outs away from making their first pennant. And then George Springer hit a 3-run homer for the Blue Jays to take the lead, and then they would keep the lead and then obviously make a deep run in the World Series. But yeah, this series was just amazing, and it is the 8th best league championship series of all time. Number 7, the 1988 NLCS. The first time the Dodgers and the Mets faced each other in the playoffs. Unfortunately, the 2024 NLCS wasn't nearly as entertaining as the 1988 one. However, the 1988 one was just so entertaining. The Mets were completely the favorites to win, fresh off winning the World Series 2 years earlier and having some of the best players at that point in time. And the Dodgers were underdogs, not really expected to perform all that well. And the fact that they were going toe-to-toe with the Mets was beyond impressive. However, I think the big game was Game 4. The Mets were winning for most of the game. Dwight Gooden was pitching an amazing game, and he was like a top 3, top 5 pitcher at that point in time. And then Mike Scioscia, who was not much of a power hitter, hit a home run to tie it, and then the Dodgers ended up winning that game. And then this series did go 7 games, but the Dodgers were able to capitalize from Game 4, and they were able to win the series and then the World Series. But yeah, the 1988 NLCS was just amazing, and it is definitely the better of the 2 times the Dodgers and Mets faced each other in NLCS. Which, I mean, by the way, like, the 2024 NLCS was not bad. Obviously, I had one of the best experiences watching Game 6. But obviously, from an objective standpoint, the 1988 NLCS was just leagues better. And it is one of the 10 best of all time. Number 6, the 2006 NLCS. Now, this one is a one that's a lot harder to talk about, considering my dad is a big Mets fan and he was at Game 7. However, this series was really intense. The Mets ended up winning Game 1, and then the Cardinals won Game 2 and 3, and then the Mets won Game 4, and then the Cardinals won Game 5. And then Game 6 was very intense. The Mets almost threw it away with Billy Wagner, who is one of the best relievers of all time. And they were winning by quite a bit, and then they almost blew it, but luckily they were able to hold on for Game 6. And then Game 7 was really intense. The Mets took an early lead, but then the Cardinals tied it, and then it looked like the Cardinals were about to take the lead, and then Andy Chavez made one of the greatest fielding plays of all time. And the Mets seemingly had all the momentum. And then the day that Yadier Molina started to make a name for himself was hitting a 2-run homer in the 9th inning for the Cardinals to take the lead. However, with the bases loaded, 2 outs, down by 2, and Carlos Beltran, who was one of the best hitters at that point in time, coming up, he had a chance to tie it. However, Adam Wainwright, who was a completely unknown pitcher at that point in time, it also might have been his first year. At the time, he was also a reliever, and then he eventually became a starter. He struck Carlos Beltran out with a nasty curveball, and Carlos Beltran struck out looking, and Mets fans were definitely really depressed. However, objectively, it was a great NLCS. It was a 7-game series. It had a lot of drama, and overall, it was just an amazing NLCS. Number 5, the 2023 ALCS, between the Rangers and the Astros. This ALCS was just really intense. The Astros, who were the World Series champions the year before, who then won the division, were the heavy favorites against the Texas Rangers, who only made it in as a wild card. And the Texas Rangers shocked everyone by winning the first 2 games in the Astros territory. And then the Astros ended up winning 3 games in the Rangers territory. And then, with the Rangers' backs against the wall, they were able to win Game 6, and then eventually Game 7. And then obviously they ended up winning the World Series for the first time in their franchise history. And I think that's why this is one of the greatest ALCS, is because of what it led into. Because I think sometimes when you're talking about best of all time, I definitely think storylines and context matters when you're talking about best sports moments. But yeah, 2023 ALCS was a great ALCS. The Rangers ended up making it back to the World Series, and this time they were able to finish their job. But even the Rangers versus Astros games itself, they were definitely very competitive. They were great games. And overall, it was just a great series. In my opinion, it is the 5th best league championship series of all time. Number 4 is the 2008 ALCS between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Boston Red Sox. The Boston Red Sox, who won the World Series the year before, were definitely the heavy favorites against the Rays. I almost said Rangers, but no, it was the Tampa Bay Rays. And the Rays, who were still a relatively new team, never made it to the World Series, were able to shock the world and were able to make it to the World Series for the first time in their team history. And the games itself were very intense. The Rays took an early series lead, and then the Red Sox came back and then tied it. And then the Tampa Bay Rays were able to finish the job in Game 7. And even though they didn't win the World Series, in fact, they weren't even really close, it was still a great ALCS because, well, I mean, not just because the games were just great itself, but also because the Rays were able to make their first pennant in their franchise. So, yeah, the 2008 ALCS was great, and it is number 4. Number 3 is the 2003 ALCS. This was just a great series. The Yankees and Red Sox, division rivals, going toe-to-toe, and it coming down to a Game 7 where Roger Clemens was going to face Pedro Martinez, two of the best pitchers of all time and definitely of that era. And Roger Clemens was doing horrible that game. They took him out early, and Pedro was pitching a heck of a game. But then, unfortunately, to the manager's mistake, he kept Pedro in too long, and then the Red Sox blew a 5-run lead, where all they had to do was take Pedro out, and they would have won. But then Aaron Boone, who is now the manager of the Yankees, was able to walk it off in extras, and the Yankees made it back to the World Series. And look, I think what makes this ALCS great isn't just the games itself, but it's also context. The Red Sox were still on an 85-year drought, and this felt like their time to make it back to the World Series and hopefully finish the job. And the fact that they were so close and then they ended up losing. And I think what makes this ALCS though better in retrospect is that they were able to learn from their mistakes and beat their team that has eluded them for 85 years the next year in ALCS. I think that's what makes this great in retrospect. Number 2 is also 2003. The 2003 NLCS. This was a great series. The Cubs, who hadn't won in 95 years up to that point, were trying to make it back to the World Series, which at that point it's been like 50 years since they made it, so it was also a while since they even made it to the World Series, let alone winning against the Marlins, who were still a relatively new team but were able to win 6 years earlier. The Cubs took an early 3-1 series lead, and then the Marlins were able to win Game 5. Then the Cubs were having a great Game 6. They were 5 outs away. And then the infamous Steve Bartman thing happened. Now, I do not think it's Steve Bartman's fault at all. But obviously, after Steve Bartman, obviously the Cubs collapsed from there. And then the Marlins were able to come all the way back and win the game. And then Game 7. And I think, part of what makes this NLCS so great is partially because of how heartbreaking it is. However, objectively, it was a great NLCS. The Cubs coming so close, losing to a team of underdogs. And then, obviously, because they won 13 years later, even though it wasn't 1 year later, like the Red Sox case, this moment did hit a lot harder in retrospect. But yeah, it was a great NLCS. In my personal opinion, it's the best NLCS and the second best league championship series overall. However, coming in at number 1 by a landslide is the 2004 ALCS. I think it's pretty simple. The only time in history a team came back from a 3-0 deficit but still won the best of 7 series. The fact that the Red Sox were 3 outs away with Mariano Rivera, on the mound, it's like it was game over. But obviously, the most iconic moment was Dave Roberts' stolen base. Obviously, now he's the manager for the Dodgers. It is kind of crazy that it went from the Yankees manager being the hero of the series, the Dodgers manager being the hero of this series. But yeah, that was just a great moment. And then obviously the Red Sox were able to tie it. And then Big Papi made a name for himself by having 2 walk-offs in a row in Game 4 and 5. And then Game 6 was an intense game with the bloody sock game with Kurt Schilling pitching very well despite his bloody sock. And then even though Game 7 was just a blowout, the fact that the Red Sox were able to stay alive with their backs against the wall and then win the World Series, it makes this series just hit so much harder. It was truly an amazing series. And in my opinion, it is the best league championship series of all time. And if I'm being very honest, it might even be the best MLB playoff series of all time. And yes, that includes all the World Series that's ever happened. Now, thanks for watching. Feel free to share what you think are the best league championship series down below in the comments. And tomorrow, I'm doing the top 15 World Series. So I'm very excited for tomorrow's video. Now, thanks for watching, and peace out.